Yeah, welcome back everyone to our last plenary part of the conference. I hope you found the discussion forum interesting and fruitful for your research. We at least saw very vivid discussions at the poster presentations, so I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the researchers involved in this event very much for their active participation. Thank you also to the members of our commission for actively preparing this event and for chairing each session. Thank you so much. For the now following session, I would like to welcome my colleague Marco Finetti. Marco is head of DFG's Press and Public Relations, and he is DFG's spokesperson. He will now take the task to moderate a panel of experts to discuss their perspective on lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. Marco, very good to have you here, and please tell us what the following part is about.
Yes, thank you, Anna, my dear colleague, and thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for your ongoing interest in this conference. We have indeed a high participation also to this closing panel. Thank you very much. I really welcome you to this panel and to say some words before. Over the last 18 months, together with my colleagues of Press and Public Relations, I really had the pleasure to accompany DFG's Commission on Pandemic Research, because communication has always been very important to the Commission and played always an important role in its work. So, for instance, we could take the opportunity to publish the Commission's dossier on vaccination in Germany's leading political daily newspaper, the FAZ. Or have conducted a series of interviews with members of the Commission in our own printed magazines, Forschung and German Research. Now, today, it is my great pleasure, also as a sort of communication, to moderate this panel. And I think this panel is going not completely different from the conference itself, but in some respects different. First, of course, in its format as panel, even if we are not together here at DFG's main office at Bonn, but connected from different places. Second, and more in its focus. Whereas the other parts of the conference have a global perspective, and I think the keynote this morning really was global, we are now not going back to our German Klein-Klein, but consciously focus on lessons learned and future tasks in Germany and for research and research system in Germany. And we will try to look also beyond science, research and academia and make some remarks on politics and society. We will discuss and focus this German perspective with 4 experts, and I really have the great pleasure to introduce to you now, and if you have the opportunity to at least a warm digital applause, please welcome Professor Marylyn Addo from University Medical Center Hamburg-Eppendorf. Nice to have you here with us. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
We have Professor Cordula Artelt from University of Bamberg and Leibniz-Institut for Educational Trajectories. She's also a member of DFG's Commission for Pandemic Research. Nice to have you here with us. Hello. We have Professor Cornelia Betsch from University of Erfurt. She's also a member of DFG Commission of Pandemic Research. And we have Ralf Heyder from the Charité Berlin and the new Netzwerks Universitätsmedizin. Thank you all indeed for your participation in this panel. So we spoke before to talk on 3 major topics. First, about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic for science and research and your respective field and work, and the other way around, about the contribution of science and research to cope and to deal with the pandemic. Second, and that is very necessary, about the relationship between science, politics, and society in the light of COVID-19 in Germany. And third, about preparedness and what has to be done different and better in the next global crisis, because this crisis is sure to come. After that, there will be the opportunity for questions from the audience, even if we will pass over the time for some minutes, I think. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question to the panel, please press the question and answer button in the navigation bar on the left. The questions will be collected here, and we will select a few at the end and try to answer them. So that's the menu, and if no one is leaving the room right now, we are going to proceed like this. Thank you. In the beginning, I would ask each one of you 2 or 3 questions in order to get a wide range of impression and perspective. And I would start with the medical perspective, because even if we may think today that COVID-19 is above all a political or societal phenomenon and problem, in the first line, it has been and still is a medical and health phenomenon and problem, as we heard also this morning from Sir Jeremy. So starting with Marylyn Addo, you are an infectiologist at University Medical Center in Hamburg, the UKA. You have done research on the Ebola virus and other viruses. You have dealt with questions and issues of vaccine and vaccination even before COVID-19. Then came COVID-19. What was the impact of the pandemic on your field of research and on your own personal work?
Well, as you said earlier on, it was really also a medical challenge that we had to face early on. So if we go back to January 2020, we were watching what was going on in the world, but then in January it hit Munich, it hit Germany for the first time. And in a group of experts that has been working together for a long time, managed through the RKI, we've been discussing on almost a weekly or sometimes a bi-weekly time frame how to deal with this new situation, to learn about the disease. It's like this is the 3rd coronavirus, major coronavirus outbreak that we're facing at this point in time, like after SARS, the first SARS, and MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. We now had COVID-19, and we had to learn about the disease, about the pathophysiology. There were lots of management issues at the beginning, and we had also had to learn how to address these issues in the hospital. We had to kind of make sure that we separate the COVID-19 individuals from other patients in the hospital. So there were major challenges that Germany was quite well prepared for, but the scale of the problem certainly was huge, and day by day we had to learn more.
Okay. You already have named the 2 worlds, I think, which are very important, the research and also the hospital. What do you think is the impact of this field on research to deal and cope with the pandemic?
Well, we've seen incredible progress in research, and I think also Germany made major contributions in the understanding of the disease and how to manage it, that it's not only a respiratory disease, but also can affect different organs. And so many individuals and scientists that are probably here in the auditorium and across the nation have really contributed dramatically to our better understanding of this disease. But in turn, also, this has been a magnificent challenge to society and also to the research community, and especially on the field of vaccines, but also on the field of understanding basic immunology, immunity to the virus, and also drug. Although the progress has been smaller than what we have seen in the dramatic successes of vaccine research, we've really made some quite spectacular insights we see.
Yes, that's very interesting, because in the public attention there's of course the tremendous success story of BioNTech and the mRNA vaccine, but I find it very interesting that there are other substantial benefits where medical research has been successful in Germany. Are there any fields that they've been not successful in Germany, where they failed?
Well, I think we're going to address some of the shortcomings of the pandemic during the course of this discussion. So, a situation like this is always a stress test for society. It's a stress test for research, and this is going to be our formidable task after this to learn from this. And this has also been addressed by Sir Jeremy Farrar this morning. We have the absolute obligation to kind of see what has worked well and what has not worked well, point the finger there, and be better prepared for the next time.
Okay. Last point, because we are in the middle of the 4th wave, may you add some words on the current situation, maybe also on your University Medical Center?
Well, yeah, I can, we're in the north of the country, so we're probably a little bit less affected than some parts of Germany, like Bavaria and some of the eastern states. So, at the peak of the pandemic, we've had 3 regular wards full of COVID patients and 3 intensive care units full of patients in our University Medical Center. At this point in time, there's only 1 regular ward and 1 intensive care unit. And as of today, we had 9 COVID patients, but we had to close the unit for only COVID patients. This is the new stepwise approach, so we cannot have any other patients on that ward. So we're feeling the heat, but obviously in other parts of the country, the situation is much more grim. And this is just the beginning. We're seeing the economics rising, and so we know what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time.
Yes, I think so. Good luck with feeling and dealing with the heat. Thank you very much for these first impressions. Let's stay some moments with the medical and health aspects, but perhaps from a different perspective. Ralf Heyder, you are head of external networking and strategic partnerships at the Charité in Berlin. Before that, you have been for many years General Secretary of the Association of University Medical Center in Germany. Now you have another additional job to do. How did it come?
Well, in order to answer that question, I would like to go back to the time when the idea to create a national network of university medical centers for COVID-19 research originated, and that was around about March last year, in a situation where we had a massive public health and healthcare crisis in the Lombardy, Italy. At the same time, we had a surge in COVID-19 patients in Germany. We were in the middle of the first wave. And there was a lot of concern back then in the federal government and the state governments that we would end up in a situation very similar to that we were witnessing in Lombardy at the time, with lots of academic medical centers in Germany reaching their capacity limit in patient care around Easter time. And back in that situation, we saw at the same time that there was a lot of new research initiatives on COVID-19, but lots of those were on a small scale, rather fragmented. A lot of it was monocentric, not multicentric. And yet, at the same time, we saw the first big studies coming out of the international realm, out of the UK, the recovery studies surely being the most prominent one. And in that situation, the federal government started thinking about putting into place a coordinating mechanism to sort of enable the German research realm to work together, to build platforms, to join forces, so to speak, to combat this crisis. And in that situation, the federal government decided to provide a grant of 150 million euros to the Charité University Medical Center in Berlin in order to coordinate 36 German academic medical centers to join forces and to establish collaboration, exchange data, and address those research needs that could best be addressed through collaboration and also create synergies. And basically this project, which is spearheaded by the Charité in Berlin, ended up sort of creating the basis for this collaboration effort that we are talking about today.
So, and your new job is to coordinate this new network. As we get it right, this was a political initiative led out by the now outgoing Minister for Education and Research. Why was it not an initiative by the University Medical Center itself?
Well, I think there are 2 quick answers to that. One of which is that the need to create such a collaborative framework has not been as obvious before the pandemic as it has become during the pandemic. We simply saw that we were not able to do certain things that other countries were able to do. In particular, we did not have at the time any aggregate data on a national level on the course of the pandemic. And another large issue, of course, is that such a collaboration initiative needs infrastructure. It needs resources to organize this, and therefore we needed the political support and the funding to put this into place. Okay,
you named the main purposes, and some 18 months ago, after some 18 months, sorry, are there some benefits you can name concretely yet?
Well, we have, within a rather short notice after the start of the project, within 6 months, created 13 large-scale collaborative multi-center projects, each of which has in between 9 and 36 participating university medical centers. All 13 have provided research results, have contributed to developing clinical guidelines, have published in high-level journals, but I would like to highlight 4 projects in particular that really have made
in short, please.
That have really made a major contribution to infrastructure development. One of which is our national cohort platform, which creates 3 internationally highly competitive cohorts, patient cohorts on COVID-19. Together with the Medical Informatics Initiative, we are working on pulling together clinical routine data in a central data platform, and I think we will succeed in doing so by the end of this year. We have joined forces of all German radiology departments at academic medical centers, joining their imaging data. And we have created a national autopsy network, which also is, to our knowledge, the only such network worldwide that pulls together autopsy data as well as biosamples.
Okay. Thank you. So you may have another impression as the authors of this preprint study that rose high in tension a few weeks ago, because it drew a critical, somehow sobering picture on medical and especially clinical research towards COVID-19 in Germany. How's your impression on this?
Well, I think there are 2 sides to this. On the one hand, I think there is a fair assessment that clinical research, clinical studies in Germany have not been on the same level from the start, at the start of this pandemic, as some of the international initiatives we have seen. And that has been an issue that has been a political debate for many years. But on the other hand, we have seen some progress in some of the projects we are currently implementing. I have mentioned the big NAPCON cohort platform, which has put into place internationally highly competitive cohorts. But of course, that is a very recent development, and we are still only starting to see the results from this. So I think it's fair to say there are definitely things we need to work on. There's room for improvement, in particular also in the realm of clinical studies. But in terms of observational studies, we have really made a contribution in the network.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Heyder. Coming to Cordula Artelt, I before thought of a phrase that is often heard in educational and also political settings and campaigns: no child left behind. To be honest, I have always been skeptical towards this phrase, but I found it astonishing how much important and how quickly important children, education, learning, schools, things like this became in this pandemic, and also in the discussion of the pandemic. Cordula Artelt, you are leading the greatest nationwide study on education and learning in Germany and are director of Leibniz-Institut of Educational Trajectories. Does this pandemic mean also golden time for your field of research?
Golden times. That's a strange association. I think it could in some way be a possibility, but real life also shows us that, especially in times of like this, the corona pandemic, it's hard to do research as we did before, because very often schools and institutions close their doors and they were not accessible as they were before. There has been a structural problem, but so that's not golden times. It's hard times to some extent, although there are different ways. Research has to change. We already changed, and we have to look for other ways of collecting data and getting the information we need for our field. But maybe coming back to the No Child Left Behind you mentioned at the beginning, it's an act of Congress of the US Bush administration in 2001, and ever since it has been in the political discussion. But it's a model of allocating money to schools depending on performance, and this is probably not the thing that we are dealing here right now.
Yes, sure.
Because the meaning of leaving nobody behind has got a much more dramatic dimension since we know what kind of possibilities the exogenous shock of the corona pandemic caused for the educational field and for individuals not having access to all these possibilities of formal instruction and being left alone in some circumstances. And some people, some children are more vulnerable than others, definitely.
Okay. Yes, that's another context. Thank you for clarifying this. So I really mean golden times in terms of attention. You said hard times, of course, in terms of infrastructure and the daily research, of course. So what do you think? What is perhaps even in the long term the benefit of studies like these for dealing and coping with pandemic situations or other crises?
Going back to what you just mentioned, I think this is a very important a property of the pandemic, that education has reached more attention than it has in the past, and that our a bit complicated system of responsibilities and also being depending on whether we talk of early childcare and education or schools or university or further education located on the federal or on the state government, and having different organizational structures, that this system has also been put under stress, and that much of development has taken place. And this is the good thing about the development, that suddenly things are getting, and not everything is taken for granted anymore in the educational system, and that really opens an avenue for implementing things that have been clear in research or have been discussed in research for a long time, but still need an avenue for implementation, which is a research task in itself. But I might have not answered your question. I'm sorry.
No, you have. No, you have. Last question to you in this first round, perhaps even to wider the picture. This morning, Sir Jeremy has talked about the different lines, first line, second line, third line. Do you think that social sciences and even the humanities in general are accepted for their benefits? Are accepted for the benefits in dealing and coping with pandemic? Are they also valued for it? Can they play the role they are supposed to play?
Yeah, let's hope so, don't we?
So, yeah.
I mean, the question is who is responsible, and when thinking of the different lines, I'm recalling the different levels Jeremy Ferrer was talking about, and I particularly noted the third one, indirect effect, which is the disruption of societal on the societal level, being a challenge to democracy and also to lose of trust and the kind of information we are relying on and the problems that we have with different sources. And this is a challenge, definitely. Is it the schools that need to do that kind of training? They have to, in a way, do that and build it in their curricula, but of course they can't be left alone with that. But still, it's our, as a society, main task of transforming knowledge into the next generation. I think it's. I'm not sure if they're receptive. I think they are receptive, but putting it into practice and making it a quality and a best practice, that really needs a lot of work still.
Does Cornelia Betsch agreeing to you, I see? Thank you. Closing this first round with Cornelia Betsch, you are a psychologist and professor of health communication. And I think before the pandemic, one might have thought, what's that? Now there's a lot of intention for this kind of communication and also for this kind of research, and especially for your own personal works. Not to become sarcastic, but did it need a pandemic to stress the importance and the benefits of that?
I think it's been known for a while, and I think health communication as a field has seen a very strong development over the last decade. And I think this is also mirrored in the fact that organizations like WHO and the regional office in Copenhagen for Euro also develops behavior insights unit, which uses insights from culture and behavioral sciences to improve health behavior. So I think this is a very good time for this kind of discipline, or it's an interdisciplinary endeavor. And the pandemic, for sure, I think showed it also to politicians, to countries, to societies, that this is an important field.
Okay. Your work is practically equated with the Cosmos study. Can you tell us something about this study, and how has this study changed over the last 18 months? Yes, over the last month.
Well, I think the basic idea behind it is that the host of this virus is human, and so that we need to understand humans to create behavior change and optimal behavior change. So the idea at the very beginning of the pandemic was to create a monitoring system, and I think that's something also we should take as a learning from the pandemic, that we need behavior insights and what people think, how they feel, what are the topics that are important to them, how's trust developing over time, to sail through this pandemic successfully. And this is not the only crisis; it also pertains to other crises like climate crisis, etc. So the Cosmos study looks at 1,000 participants every second week and communicates the results very quickly to the public, to the media, and to the politicians, in order to help them to gather some insights on how people, the psychological situation of the pandemic.
I think there are a lot of insights. There are a lot of issues, figures, and results. What do you think? Which one or which ones are the most significant and important to deal and cope with the pandemic? Are there any special?
Well, right now we're looking at vaccine hesitancy or vaccine willingness to get vaccinated. I think at the moment that's something that is our minds very strongly, but we also look at topics like the 3G, 2G regulations, things that come up in a new situation. And because we think it's very important to look at what the majority thinks, because politicians always tell you that they need to seek majorities. And I think it's easy as a politician to ignore majorities, because everyone that comes up and speaks with you is probably angry and criticizes the regulations. So I think it's really important to have some statistics that provide a solid basis and suggest what majorities actually are.
Okay, I think that leads us directly to our second major topic. Planning and organizing this conference, we found it worthwhile, but even necessary, to discuss the relationship between science, politics, and society in Germany in the light of COVID-19. And to start with it, I would like to recall a statement that is really often heard in the last 18 months, also from DFG and also from DFG Commission for Pandemic Research. And that statement is that never before in German history, science and scientists have become as much important for politics and politicians and have found their way into the middle of the society as within this pandemic. But is this really so? I would like to ask first the two non-members of the Commission and then invite the other two. So Marylyn Addo, Ralf Heyder, who would like to start to comment this statement, this really often heard statement?
Well, I can make a start. And I think this is a really important topic, and we're obviously in the time that we have available to us, we can only scratch the surface of that, because that is probably a critical element of what happened in the last year. So like obviously the visibility of science and scientists was very high, but some of the roles appeared to become a little blurry. Like, what is the role of scientists? What can they contribute? What is the role of politics? And how does the interplay play out? So I think this is something that we have to look at very critically looking back. So the role of science, well, we've obviously made major headway, and if you kind of consider that I'd say 80 million people probably know what an incidence value is and an R value. And so like we have 80 million experts in the country now. But also there were, like different aspects that were probably confusing, like science probably also, and here is where communication and the work that Cornelia Betsch does, and all of us probably also have to address a little bit more specifically going in the future, communication and like loss of trust and loss of trust in science. I think mistakes were made, or let's say there is room for improvement going forward. And I think it's critical that we learn what went well and what did not go so well, and then devise plans of how to prepare. So there are certain suggestions that have been made. Do we need it's been individual experts who've been very exposed. Like, do we need a gremium? How do we go forward? And I think this is an important an issue. And like getting fact news was not easy in this pandemic because there was an infodemic where also like non-fact news were widely available in different media outlets. And so I think we'll have to kind of see what our role and our contribution can be going forward. Maybe I'll stop here.
Yes, thank you. Ralf Heyder, what is your opinion, your impression?
Well, I think it's a fair assessment that in this crisis, we have seen an unprecedented presence of science and scientists in media and also in political decision-making. And I think a lot of this is due to the very special nature of this crisis, which is unusual in many aspects. For example, that it requires very rapid political decision-making that has very immediate impact and affects the whole population. That is not the usual state of political decision-making. And I think it's very natural that in such a situation, politics turns to the experts, to the people who hold the key, the answers to solving this crisis. However, is this something that can easily be transferred to other political decision-making processes, to other crisis situations? I really don't know. I think that to some extent we can learn lessons when it comes to political communication, when it comes to also become faster at really separating good evidence from bad evidence, and also translating this knowledge into information that the wide public and decision makers can easily access. I think there's definitely some room for improvement there, but I would to some extent be hesitant to transfer too many of the lessons learned in this specific crisis with this very special context to other political debates and societal debates. Okay.
Thank you. So inviting the two members of the Commission, I would like to add another question. What do you think is associated with this role and this importance of science? Are there any new or good opportunities to take, or are there more responsibilities, and what could this be? Who's going? Cordula Artelt. What is associated with these roles? Opportunities to take, responsibilities?
Definitely responsibilities, and I think I would like to follow up on what Ralf Heyder said before. The situation right now is specific in many dimensions, and the specificity comes also from the fastness, the need for quick responses, for urgent acts steps that need to be taken. And to be honest, being in the shoes of a policymaker at this time is definitely not so very attractive, at least for me. There might be others in that situation. But then we have to learn that the logic of politics and the logic of science is not totally the same. So we have, rather to say, they are very different. So we have ways of coming to our conclusions. And what the challenge or what the new aspect here is that it shows us that it's not enough to lean back and say, well, high quality research needs time and we need to wait until this and that happens. But we are all sitting in the same boat, and there's a common good of helping our societies and not only our society, but individuals and also globally to deal with that situation. And this brings me back to the question of communicating and valuing what is a reliable finding and how to frame advices, because you can do it in a very plain way, and this is always a challenge with people who say, what does that mean? What should I do? And that could be, that's a balance. And I think it's also a learning process for the science or participants in science themselves, because you need to really be reflective about what you say and the role there, and probably don't mix up with different perspectives. And this is a very important thing, I think. And maybe, no, I'm stopping here because of time. Let Cornelia Betsch continue.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, many important things have been said already. I think one challenge is always to separate opinion and evidence, because the media also that also request experts are also quite often trying to tease you into giving your opinion, and then sticking with evidence and saying, I don't know, is a pretty challenging task and needs to be practiced as well. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of researchers actually thought, okay, what can I contribute? And a lot of people changed their research agendas and wanted to contribute something. And then it appeared that the selection process of who was heard by politics or who was asked by the media was quite a random process, and it appeared that actually the big media did some kind of a pre-selection for the political process. And I think this is something we really need to work on in after the pandemic, if we can say this, after all, or in the between pandemics. In peace times, there needs to be an increased interaction between science and politics. So increased science to society programs where we learn how to speak to each other, how to listen to each other, how the processes are. As a scientist, we never knew how politics or how policies were made. And I think that's very important to learn from each other, so we can improve the process in the next time, in the next crisis.
Yes, thank you very much. As being a journalist for many years, I think that it should be also the duty and task of the media to separate evidence and opinion, but that's a problem for itself. Thank you very much. Another question to you, Cornelia Betsch. Being put or even catapulted into the political and also the media spotlight, what does that do to scientists? What has it done to you? Because you became a public figure yourselves.
Well, not quite so much as other colleagues, and I know that other colleagues that are closer to what should we do are much more in the center of criticism or hate speech or hate emails. So I think that's very difficult to cope with, and I know that it also happened in my group, and we're trying to talk about it and largely ignore it. But I think at a certain extent, it's very difficult to ignore it, and it leads people to to maybe not agree to go to that talk show or to do some interviews. So I think that's a very difficult process, and it needs to be put into the discussion, I think. Politicians are probably used to this, but scientists aren't. And I think that's something that needs to be in the public debate as well.
Yes, there have been hate speeches, there have been also physical attacks, but there might be other impacts, for instance, arguments or struggles between medical professionals and patients who refuse to being vaccinated, even in face of intensive care. Marylyn Addo, did you make any experiences like this?
Well, I've been in the vaccine field for a long time, and I just have to point out that, and I think Cornelia mentioned it before, the WHO puts out a list of threats to global health every year. And in 2019, they actually put vaccine hesitancy on this list. way before we ever heard about SARS-CoV-2. So this has been an issue. And yes, I've seen it then and I've seen it now. And obviously the emotion, it's a very emotional debate, and especially now with a lot of the political pressure as well, this debate is being led fiercely in the hospital at times. We do question all our patients who are in the, or like at least we engage in dialogue. We don't question them, we engage in dialogue about the topic vaccination, and quite a few say, well, they were insecure, they didn't know, they hadn't gone around yet. We actually do regular surveys of what the reasons for those who are on our wards now not being vaccinated are. And so it's very few, and I think this has been come out in the recent years also, very few are extreme vaccine anti-vaxxers. Like there's a broad spectrum of the community within those people who are not vaccinated, who are just insecure. They don't understand the speed of development, and can this be secure? And I think we probably did not do good enough of a job to get the message across and to really address those concerns. Yes. And that's our task going forward, because each vaccination counts now more than ever. And I think we'll have to build on what we've started and get better in this.
Yes, really. I think at the end of the second major topic, we shall talk about the current situation. I do not know, but one may not have the impression that politics has listened in the last weeks or months to the warnings and recommendations concerning a fourth wave. And I think for most of the people, not only the carnivalists at Cologne, science seems not to be very important, but only perhaps killjoy and annoying. What do you think about the current situation? Who's going to start? Cornelia Betsch, what do you think about the current situation?
Well, maybe something...
You were cited in the title story of German's news magazine Der Spiegel today, which has the headline, A Federation of Imbeciles.
Well, maybe something regarding the scientists, or how we interact with politics. Just to add a little note on this, I think scientists are a very valuable resource, but it's not an endless resource. And I think that's important also to know for politics and society and the media, because what I realized during the whole process is that scientists are really getting, well, burned out in a way because a lot of scientists are really engaged in speaking to politicians, having telephone conferences with the Minister of Health, etc., and they realize that things like the carnival situation happen, or we see a fourth wave, and nothing is really happening. And I think I just had the experience that the emails increased, asking for telephone conferences at 10 p.m. So to talk about the situation and to do some like open letters, etc. Because scientists feel that there needs to be some change, and I think that's a very dramatic situation, that the resource of expertise is not really used, or it's kind of bleated to death, to be honest. And I think that's a very difficult and dangerous situation, because also the public learns that there is some scientific evidence and there is no political action following from this. So what do you teach your society about science? And I think that's a very dramatic situation at the moment.
Yes, there is already the buzzword silencing. There are scientists who are leaving the discussion and leaving the arena, but that's not the way it should be. Yes. Any other comments on current situation? Okay, I think once again that leads us directly to our last topic, regarding preparedness and look into the future, into the next crisis. And this crisis does not have to be just a pandemic, as also Sir Jeremy underlined this morning, but this next crisis is sure to come. So again, I would like to ask some questions to each of you first, and then we can comment each other. First question, what has to be done different and better in this next crisis? Marylyn Addo, what has to be done different and better?
Yeah, this is actually also something that was kind of already brought up in the keynote this morning. So like I think we have really, it's critical that we will learn from this and kind of really examine, not when the pandemic is gone, we go back to the normal. Sure. We have to keep the level of alertness quite high. So what has been, and this is not the first time that this has been brought up. After the Ebola crisis also, we realized that we are always reacting. So like something happens and react, or something happens, we react. And already in the aftermath of the Ebola crisis, some things were put in place. For instance, there was the WHO convened an expert panel and said, like, so what are the diseases that are likely to cause pandemics or epidemics in the future? And they made that list. That's now the WHO blueprint list. And the SARS and MERS and coronaviruses, highly pathogenic coronaviruses, were on that list. And the list was supposed to serve as a basis of proactive development for vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. And some of the benefits that we essentially harvested now stem from this initial investment, or organizations like CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, was founded in the aftermath of that crisis to have a tool of proactively designing vaccines. And a lot of the vaccine candidates that are now kind of in discussion have received initial funding from there. So I think we need these like proactive and not reactive approaches. And I think where the DFG, for instance, comes in, like, and I love the term that Sir Jeremy this morning used, curiosity research. So some of the successes in the vaccine field were funded and seeded through public funding in the context of a SFB many years back, which kind of provided funding for the mRNA technology, which now was able to be applied into a completely new context. So I think this is one thing that I feel that we really have to move forward with, and I'll pass the word on to somebody else.
Yes, that would have been the second question, to talk someone at least once about DFG and about the role DFG can take in this context. Thank you very much for mentioning this for yourselves. Cordula Artelt, what has to be done different and better in the next crisis?
Many things. Addressing it from my own field of research, I would say that there's given the changes and the necessity to address different needs of different students, and the changes that occurred by assuming that that teaching can't be the same as it has been before, relying on that opens up a very important research as well as practical field for implementing these things. So it's from other perspectives, I think it's extremely important to build up resilient schools and systems. So schools and systems that are not vulnerable to these shocks that happened. And we had a very vulnerable system with an almost collapse in the last 2 years. And there has been progress, and I'm positive about it. But the very important thing is to have a long breath and not to get back to business as usual, which is a reaction that is very inherent in many systems, and this is what we need to work for.
Yes, very important thing. So we only have 5 minutes in our regular schedule, and I think we will pass over time for some minutes for questions afterwards. But I would like to ask the two other members of the panel, Cordula Betsch, Ralf Heyder, what has to be done different and better in the next crisis?
Well, I think my takeaway is quite brief. I think we can, I hope we can speak about lessons learned and not lessons to be learned. I really hope that we do learn from it. Yes. Yeah, we do learn from it, and this learning should guide our behavior. I think we have a huge implementation problem. A lot of things that we now find out, also in my area of work, is not very new, but it's been known before, but it's not being implemented. And I think this really, really should get better. And I think we need science to society programs, more science communication, health communication to reach this goal.
Okay. Ralf Heyder, closing remarks?
Well, 3 quick points on this. I think the first point is we need to be better prepared next time by having already established national networks and platforms for collecting data that we have not had in place when the pandemic struck last year. Secondly, one of the ways to achieve this is to really push for digitalization. I think one of the most impressive examples where we can get better is that we, at this point, draw a lot of data and information on vaccination from Israel because we cannot generate the same data here. And digitalization is a key to changing that. And the third and hopefully equally important aspect is that we have a lot of great projects in Germany, lots of really highly qualified expertise, but we have not yet put it together in the way we should, and we have not yet scaled it to really roll it out on a national level. And I hope that the network of 36 academic medical centers will play a major part in the future to help facilitate this.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your remarks and thoughts and comments on these 3 major topics, and thank you for regarding the time as well. Even if we could scratch only to the surface, I found it extremely interesting and wide ranges. Thank you very much. And let's see what our audience does think, and if we have some questions, there are any questions in fact, and I'm going to read the most voted question at first. This is, how is science and humanities going to be different in post-crisis, post-pandemic times? Any expectations or thoughts on how public opinion and political opinions on science has changed? I think we talked already, but are there any comments on this question? Cordula Artelt?
Sorry, I have to unmute. Maybe not, I think from my perspective, this also adds on the last discussion we had, what needs to be changed. I think science is maybe needing to get rid of, at least I think that some people realize that having very focused disciplinary research is not the way to go. So there needs to be some cross-cutting across disciplines. And if I think it's very important for social sciences to take into account research from medical scientists as well as vice versa, and also other disciplines. And because you can't solve that task if it's a societal question. And I think this has become clear also by what Cornelia Betsch says. There's a human factor in it, and a decision-making and agenda. And this has to be taken into account. And I think this is a lesson learned for science, I think. How policy views that, I don't know. But I think for me, it's something that has to be changed in the time to come.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Well, maybe I could add a different aspect to the discussion also. So it was raised before by one of my colleagues that we need dialogue with politics and politicians, but I think also the sciences need dialogue with society, and that's where also the humanities come in, because what was so difficult in this pandemic was there was no evidence. The evidence developed as we went along, and there was a lot of fear and insecurity, and we had to basically to tolerate insecurity and also realize that there are limitations to science. That was something that maybe sometimes we didn't bring across very well. So I think we also have a task to like go out and we're publicly funded, so like to kind of give back and like, so we have, for instance, maybe just to give you an example, like in Hamburg we have an initiative which I like personally very much. It's called Wissen vom Fass, and so scientists go into pubs, well, hopefully post-pandemically we'll be able to do this again, and then interact and take questions from society to explain their respective research fields, and also like to kind of sensitize a little bit more to what is possible with science, and that there's very many shades of gray and it's not black and white, because that I think was a lot of the trouble in the beginning. Like there was such a need for, I want to know, do I go right or left, and we did not have any answers. And to kind of also sensitize for this, I think might be something that we should take with us in the next crisis or in our post-pandemic phase.
Okay. I think we talked already about the interaction of research and politics, but there's still a question on this. What do you think would be necessary to improve the interaction of research and politics? So that may be the opportunity to stress or underline what is already said before. Is there anything you would underline or stress or put them more into the light? Cornelia Betsch or Ralf Heyder, yes.
Oh,
well,
go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Cornelia Betsch.
Okay. I think it's politicians are also members of the society. So I think everything like science vom Fass, every method of science communication is important also to reach politicians. But I think it's also important to have institutionalized aspects. For example, I think it's in UK where you have visiting scholars or something like this in Parliament. So scientists are visiting the political arena, and maybe the other way around. I'm not quite sure. But to have an institutionalized way to create exchange, I think this is something we should discuss in the future, and also to have some legitimate expert groups in crisis. I think this was something also mentioned by Marylyn Addo already. Yes. That could help to give some to add some exclamation marks to what experts actually say.
Okay, Ralf Heyder.
Well, adding to my remarks earlier on the question, how much do we really need to change as a learning lesson from a rather unusual situation, I would like to sort of express the fact that I think in Germany the relationship between science and politics in the political process is actually a good one. If we look at the course of the debate, if you look at the responsiveness of politics to advice, also in international comparison, I think we have not had such a bad situation in Germany at all. Quite the opposite. We had a very responsive system. And going back to normal times, we see there are a lot of platforms of advisory boards, of committees in the parliament as well as in government institutions, where there is a constant interaction and exchange between science and political decision makers as well as government. So I think we need to be careful to too radically try to change this sort of delicate balance, because I think we have had traditionally a rather successful working relationship between politics and science. And in order to change that, I think we need to be very careful where to take measures. Okay,
thank you. There are two questions which I think are very interesting, and maybe that is a very interesting end of our discussion. First question, we have heard something about unjustified criticism of science, but what opportunities does science have to learn from justified criticism? So it may be interesting to hear what is this justified criticism, but do you have any ideas concerning this question? What opportunities does science have to learn from justified criticism?
maybe I start because
Yes, please.
We are very often asked to infer consequences of our findings. Even journals ask us in the last section to do so. And I think I realized that this is not done with enough reflection, or not done with enough taking care sometimes. And I think one thing that needs to be considered more in depth is what is relevant and what is reliable there. And this is maybe coming up with too much of a, this could be a headline, and I'm able to have a very important press response, and this kind of behavior that could be a lesson learned. But yeah, I think the others have more perspectives to add.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think many of you might still remember the replication crisis in psychology, where we actually wondered how much we can trust our own findings, and findings replicable. Can we generalize them to other parts of the world? And I think that's a very important topic. As we came through the pandemic, we saw a lot of preprints, and journalists discovered that there is something like preprints, and very fresh, unreplicated new findings went into the media and were generalized. And I think that's that created some debate as well. I think that was a very important point during the pandemic, to critically ask what research actually can do. And of course, I mean, scientists are humans as well, and they want to have some publicity around their findings and might make a press conference with very fresh findings. And I think there is a lot of responsibility, both on the side of the scientists, but also on the media. And it creates an even more difficult situation for the politicians, because it poses the question whom to trust.
Yes.
And yeah.
Marylyn Addo, yeah.
Yeah, like I would like to reiterate what Cornelia just said, because I think the preprint, like new preprint era, has on the one hand opened up kind of accessibility to data right fresh off the press, which has been a good thing in many ways, because that's what we've been accusing in the years before, that people wait and hold on to their data and don't share it publicly because they're waiting to publish it at high impact. But on the same token, it's exactly what Cornelia just mentioned can happen, and so like there was no filter, and I think it got lost that this is unreviewed raw data, and a lot of some things went viral on TikTok or whatever social media outlet, and then like it had to actually be withdrawn later on because it was false, or it was falsely interpreted. So I think that we have to look there. That is just certainly something where we have to get better. And then, but I also think we should probably also incorporate this. And I agree with Ralf Heyder that not everything has to change after the pandemic, but maybe like science communication and like the sensitization about our responsibilities as scientists and like interface with politics can be kind of reflected upon now in the aftermath of the pandemic. And maybe we'll have to train our young scientists better in these kind of things, so I've been, and not only we can do it with our scientists and maybe have some modules about science communication, but on the other side, we can also need dialogue with the media and also train the journalists and kind of hopefully like find a better place or a more constructive place there. So that's something I would think of when we look at constructive or righteous criticism.
Okay, we already know we still have a lot of questions about communication. So communication is really a very important thing. Nothing without communication. But while we were talking, and we're now over time, while we were talking, there come in some questions addressed directly to Ralf Heyder, and maybe we will end with this question. Ralf Heyder, is increasing digitalization enough to prepare for the next pandemic? And second question, Have you heard of the climate crisis, and does you know how German politics have blocked measures against it?
Well, to start with the second question, of course I've heard of it, and of course I know the course of the debate. But again, that reflects upon what I tried to say earlier. That's a very different type of crisis with very different types of political challenges, not immediately responsive to an entire population, no immediate effects of today's decisions. So a very different type of crisis. But of course, my message was not that the political handling of crises cannot be improved. However, I just think that the responsiveness of political decisions to science and the facts that science provides is different in different types of crises because other factors have to wade into the political process. The other question, is digitalization the solution by itself? Of course not. That's definitely one aspect that needs to be addressed, but digitalization itself does not solve the issues. We also need to be creating platforms, governance structures, regulation, and eventually also tools to use the digital data and to apply it to patient care and to improve research. And digitalization is an enabler for this, but by in itself will not make a change. We need to also create the institutions to make ample use of digitalization. And to some extent, we do not yet have those in place. So yes, digitalization is necessary, but it's only one means to an end. We need to have other measures as well.
Okay, thank you very much also for answering this. There's some questions. There are still more from the audience. I will not even try to summarize this panel and this discussion. We all hope that there have been some remarks and ideas that the audience may take with it and that are worth to be discussed further on. Thank you very much indeed for your remarks, for your participation. And now it is my great pleasure to give back to you, Anna, for coming closer to the end of the conference. Thank you very much indeed. All the best to you.